Kia ora, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Untidy. My name is Hannah Davison. I'm a mother to two, dog mother to one, cat hostage to a couple, and I am the co-founder and author of the My Big Moments children's books. I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of wonderful wahine, one of which is my radiant co-host, Maddie.
Oh, thank you so much. I love radiant. I think that's my favorite.
I like it. That's my
adjective.
go-to.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Yes, I am Matilda Green. I'm a mother of three and a content creator, not OnlyFans, just boring old Instagram. And today on the pod, we have an untidy fave, actually, and she's becoming somewhat of a regular. It's the wonderful Jo Robertson.
Thank you. This is my third time. Is it my fourth?
I know. So I'm just going to tell the people a bit about you if they don't know. So you might know Jo as sex therapist Jo, now JoRobertson.therapy on Instagram, which I'm sure a lot of you know her from that. Jo is a qualified sex therapist with a Master of Science in Medicine and has had nearly 20 years professional experience in sexual health, relationships, child development, and sexual trauma. But today we want to focus on the child development aspect. And if you're interested in her work on sex and relationships, make sure you check out our previous episodes with Jo, where we did some deep diving on that. So we'll put the links in the show notes. But first of all, a big welcome to you, Jo. We're so excited to have you back for a third time.
It's so good. I love being here in this space with you. One day I'd really like to do this in person, though.
Oh, same.
Wouldn't we all? Oh my
Yes.
God.
With like drinks and dinner after.
Yes. Yeah.
And we could all wear our untidy hats.
Yes. Yeah. We'll have a little like untidy hat party.
We'll print t-shirts specifically.
Good. I'm into it. I'll be there.
No, it's got to be our fourth ep because we did a part 1 and part 2 when we did the sex and relationships Q&A because there was so many questions. That's why.
Yes. That's right.
So, Jo, the Before 16 charity organisation has been in the media a lot recently, and it's all about lobbying the government to change the current legislation to raise the legal age of social media access from 13 to 16 for young people. What's been your role in this group, in this movement?
Yeah, so Before 16 is a really interesting collection of people from experts from different industry. And what my role has been alongside my colleague, Holly Brooker, and we have an advocacy organization called Make Sense. What our role has been is to contribute essentially as consultants around what kinds of harms children and young people are experiencing, because I have a particular lane and expertise that I can offer in, but also what kind of policy is needed in New Zealand, because we've been in this advocacy lobbying space now for a few years, and I've been in government relationships now for nearly 8 years, have been able to see the gaps. And so we've been offering our insight into what those gaps are and what could be done about it.
So given that you have so much knowledge about what children are exposed to online, can you give us a bit of a lay of the land? Like, how dire is it actually for young people, especially under 16s? Like, what are we talking?
Yeah, good. So we're talking about 2 different areas. Well, it's the 4 C's of online harm, actually. So contact, conduct, contract, and content. So those are the 4 key areas that young people get harmed in various online spaces. But for the purposes of social media, we're really talking about content and contact. It's a little bit of contract as well, because they tend to not know what they're signing up for. So contract is where young people don't have any idea really what the terms and conditions are when they give their information, for example, online, or where they're distributing photos of themselves. But most of the harm is in the content and contact area. So contact being the one that I am most concerned about, because of the amount of adults that are now contacting children. And when I say children, I do mean now under 16. So probably some people will be like, those are teenagers, Jo. But when it's my own.
But we're just, for the sake of the conversation, we can group them together.
Yeah, I'm going to call them children because of their just general development. We do have a really significant issue with predatory adults contacting children and young people on platforms. So 50% of grooming now occurs initially on social media channels. And what usually happens is that they contact them because they can see their images, they can locate them even sometimes on a map, and they can contact them really, really easily. And then they might shift them onto a less moderated platform like Snapchat, for example, is got really poor moderation, but also really easy to distribute images. So they take them off there and then they groom them to create what we call self-generated content. So self-generated content is where a photo or a video has been taken of a child themselves, and then it's been sent to usually a predatory adult or put on a platform somewhere else. There's been an 1,800% increase in that kind of content since 2019, in the self-generated content.
Oh my God.
These adults that you're referring to, are these adults who are posing as what might be that child's peers?
It
Like,
could
is that
be.
typically what might happen? Or
I
like,
would
what do you see?
Yeah, I would say the norm would be acting, as a similar aged person or an
Mhm.
adult that is romantically interested in them. So they're doing it to kind of get content off them, but they create a relationship. The average time, for example, of a grooming relationship is 45 minutes. So in that period of time, they've managed to establish an interest, usually a romantic interest, lots of affirmation, curiosity, and then attempting to get images off them. They often will
That's
start
no time at all.
Yeah, so often another way to start that sexual grooming would be to send some of their own images or send porn. So this desensitization of sexual content on the platform. I know it's quite gritty, I'm sorry. It's
Oh,
Well, we're just diving right in, I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a very scary prospect that in the time that you might be cooking dinner, that your child could be groomed online.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
like, we've got a question here about, like, what about parents who use parental controls? But is that can that combat this access in any way?
Well, at the moment, you've got the majority of young people signing up without parental controls. So when we create policy, we need to think about the majority. So what is the current landscape? The majority of kids sign up. I did this recently on Snapchat myself. I signed up as a 13-year-old girl. And the second thing that it asked me to do was to put my location on the Snap map. So it knows
That's
that I'm
mm,
13. They tell you in meetings, at conferences, on press releases that they, really protective of teen accounts. I have not seen that in practice. And, for example, I've sat in conferences where TikTok has shared and actually lied about the content that they put on their platforms. And I've asked anonymous questions about that, and they just avoid that completely. So I have no trust in these platforms that they would even manage parental controls very well.
What are some of the lies that you've noticed them saying? Can you give an example of that?
So an example would be they said, you can't see R18 content or sexual content if you've got a teen account or if you don't have an account at all, which is a complete lie because when you're just on the platform on a website as opposed to the app, it's streaming videos automatically. You don't even have to log in to see those videos. And you can actually do a lot of searching and hunting around, some of which are labeled R18. And I have seen these videos multiple times, not signed into an account. So it's
Oh my God.
not true. But also, the other thing that people don't really understand about content that finds itself on social media is that it doesn't have to be explicit to be harmful. So, an example of this in sexual content land, which is where I live, is that on TikTok we saw massive amounts of videos promoting choking/sexual strangulation. Now, they don't do that by seeing someone being strangled. Like, it's not a video necessarily of someone strangling another person. That content could quite quickly be removed. However, when you've got a male content creator squashing a drink bottle and saying, this is how girls like to be choked, you're not going to moderate your way out of that because it's a drink
Mm.
bottle. So You don't have to have body parts or nudity or any kind of explicit stuff to be able to send very, very harmful messages to young people. And so that's the piece as well, that people go, oh, the platforms can just do better moderation. Like, they're not going to moderate their way out of drink bottles being squashed.
Mm. And
Yeah.
also you see reels where it's just like a car driving down a street or something like that, but the reel is text. And
Yeah.
so whatever it says in the text is whatever it says in the text, and that can be very explicit. Seen it in my algorithm. And so like you can't moderate your way out of that either. A
No.
message is a message, but it's very like innocuous imagery.
Yes.
It's actually quite shocking. And I mean, I've noticed it in my own Instagram algorithm. There was somebody that I follow posted a what I eat in a day video, which I mean are toxic in themselves. But I was interested. I was like, what do you eat in a day? Show me. And so I watched this one video, and now it's like I'm bombarded with these tiny, tiny people that are from the outside looking in, underweight, and it's what they eat in a day, and it's sweet FA basically. And I'm like, oh my God, that was
You
just
watched
one, it was
one.
one video. And now I'm getting fed this toxic content. And it just goes to show that, like, really, what are they doing, to mitigate this? It doesn't look like they're doing anything. But let's talk about that in a minute. But first of all, what do we say to our kids around this kind of online harm? I mean, you have a course called Tricky Chats Parenting, which I know has been so helpful for so many parents. But can you give us a little taster or an overview of how do we talk to our children about this? I mean, like, my son's just started school, and I'm like, do I need to be more open now about this stuff? Oh God, it's just a
Yeah, well,
minefield.
because like my son's 12, he's turning 13 at the end of the year. So I'm like, here we are. We're getting into
You're in
the
you're
hot spot here.
into the cracks, yeah.
And he doesn't have a phone at this stage. Lots of his friends do. And sometimes we have conversations in the car about, hey, have you seen anything that maybe made you feel uncomfortable? Like, you're never going to get in any trouble for telling me about it. But like, if anyone's shown you anything, or, something that's popped up that you feel like maybe you shouldn't have seen, because sometimes if you're going to see things, you can't unsee them. Is there anything that you've come across that I can help you with, or anything like that? So, because I just know that we're just at that point where some kid's going to be like, hey, check this out, and then you're into it. So yeah, how do you prep your children for, hey, you might get exposed to something that makes you feel uncomfortable? Where do you go with that conversation?
Yes. Well, we started that conversation when I got 3 boys, when the boys were around 4, because they were starting to go to more play dates and being picked up from, friends from kindy and go to their house for a while. So we never had to use the word sex or porn at that stage, because you can say, hey, if you see anything that makes you uncomfortable, or if you see anything with people naked, if you see anything with people touching each other, let me know. So you can start to prompt that really, really early without exposing them to the language itself. Then as they grow up, your conversations need to become more and more explicit, and usually you need to have an explicit conversation around porn or sexual content around 10. So the new layer to that is that if your children are on gaming platforms, and if they're able to contact other people on those, then, and if you're a parent listening, you might not even know that they're able to contact strangers. So that's something you need to figure out as well. But if they are, then you need to have a very explicit conversation about grooming and exploitation and nudes. And that could be from their 7, if you've got a kid contacting strangers on platforms. So I had a 9-year-old recently say that I've got permission to share this from her parent, but she had 2 online boyfriends. And I said, how did you meet those people? And she said, through her PlayStation. So the social media ban, for example, or the minimum age isn't going to address that. So that's only something that parents and caregivers can navigate. But you might need to have that conversation quite early. And also, if you change your controls around games at the moment, and they've had access for the last 3 years, for example, to strangers, then you still need to have the conversation. Has anyone tried to contact you? Has anyone asked you for an image? Has anyone sent you any images? Have people used language like XYZ when they've been talking to you? And because it could have happened completely without your knowledge. Kids tend to intuit quite quickly that they shouldn't talk to their parents about these things because it's embarrassing. If you've been a parent or caregiver who hasn't raised that conversation very regularly, our kids do quite quickly get the message that it's not something they can raise regularly. So,
Yep.
there's layers and layers of things we can do there.
There are layers, and it just makes you think, okay, well, yes, we're talking about in the media at the moment, potential social media ban, but it's not just that. It's
Yes.
gaming consoles and it's internet.
So that was one of my frustrations actually with the recent social media, well, what the National Party has put forward. And then the ACT Party, Laura McClure, now has put forward some legislation around deep fakes, both of which I think are overall healthy and I agree with. However, they don't do anything at this big picture kind of level. So it's piecemeal. It's like, oh, we'll target this piece over here and then this piece over there, as opposed to doing what other countries have done, which is created an Online Safety Act, particularly oriented around children and young people. So we're still just going like whack-a-mole, like boom,
Yep.
boom, 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 without anybody putting real structure behind that legislation.
Yeah. And I guess just to kind of play devil's advocate here, so a lot of parents have replied to posts, some have replied to posts I've done about before 16 saying that's all well and good, but how will the legislation be enforced as children lie about their age all the time? What do you say to those parents?
There is a platform called Yubo is a good example of that, who has done age verification. They're a social media platform, and they've done age verification through a couple of different ways. So through facial recognition and through ID, and also through watching patterns of that young person's use. So you can pick up a lot of data points of what young people are doing that identifies them as a teenager. They state that they have 99% accuracy and 99% of their users would be like above 16. So they have stated that that is successful and they've been able to achieve it, which is really hopeful in terms of we do have ways to verify kids' ages that are really, really credible and reputable. So I think
And that's only going to get more and more, I think,
only
too,
gonna
right?
get better, yes.
Because the tech is there.
Absolutely. So you can't lie about your age if you're using really credible sources of age verification and you're using multi-sources. So you're 3 layers of verification, ideally. It would become extremely difficult and you'd have to be very, very intentional to be a 14-year-old trying to access social media after that. However, we do know that with any restriction, in any way, like in alcohol and smoking and marijuana and like all of that stuff, you're always going to get a percentage of people who are determined. And, they're going to go for it and they're going to try and get there. And some of those people will then succeed. We can't not protect the majority because of a handful of people who will be that determined and overcome that level of barriers. It's the equivalent of just like throwing your hands in the air and being like, oh, well, because some people don't wear seatbelts, we won't put
You
seatbelts
just
in.
won't do anything. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. Legislation is there for what we call civil society or the majority, and that is the right thing to do.
I 100% agree. And there's also an argument for the good that social media has done for some vulnerable youths. For example, connecting them with community they might not be finding in their immediate environment. Maybe like kids needing to be supported by the rainbow community or that sort of thing. So, do you think that a social media ban could cause harm in those cases, or is it a case of we sought this to protect the majority whilst finding solutions for those minorities where the online space is really important for their well-being?
Yes, I'd like to think we could be more creative in terms of how we support those young people. So, whilst there is data, I'm like all about the research and the evidence. So there is data that shows that some vulnerable young people find social media platforms helpful for them. They feel affirmed, they feel supported, they feel a sense of belonging. Those same young people, however, are also more likely to experience online hate, online bullying, and being fetishized. There's lots of different things that happen to those vulnerable young people that are absolutely not okay. They get doxxed, which means that they get outed to their communities, or their addresses get found, particularly if they're being asked to put their location on a map. And
Mm.
they are also at really significant harm. So I think it's naive to say, oh, those young people are only having a positive experience, because they're also being really seriously damaged in the process. So I'd like to imagine we could be more creative. One of the things we know now about how teenagers use social media is that they use it as a search engine. So instead of what we might do, which is go on Google or another platform and go, I'm queer and everyone is bullying me, what should I do? We might use a platform to do that, like Google. They tend not to do that, and they tend to do that searching on social media platforms. What that means is that they get people who might support them, also people who might not, but that feels good if they find someone who's supported them. Because it's been normalized that they go to social media to do that kind of searching, we could normalize the fact that you do that on a search engine platform, and you're going to get more, or you're going to get safer ways of them accessing support. So you're going to get blog posts, you're going to get websites, you're going to get apps, all of which are completely oriented around safety and belonging, not a social media platform, which will have some of that, but it will also have some of this other horrendous stuff. Is that making sense?
Yeah. Yes,
Mm.
yes, totally. But it also, in my opinion, it feels like the connection that we feel from social media is an illusion. It's kind of like this, what looks like a connection, but in fact is not. It's very fickle, and it's there to kind of hack our dopamine to make us feel good and validated and like we're connecting with other human beings when we're actually not. I personally think that you just can't connect with people properly unless it's
Yeah.
in the real world somewhere, but that's just my opinion.
Your opinion is really, really valid in terms of you are an online personality and you have the like really credible experience in terms of both building relationships online, but also being critiqued, harassed,
Mhm.
bullied,
'Cause
so
those relationships can get severed pretty quick.
yeah.
Like, people will turn on you in an instant,
Yes.
like, a lot quicker than they would in the real world.
It's amazing to me how many adults assume children and young people will be able to function at such great mature capacity when they are not doing that themselves.
Mhm.
When people have come for me, or people would have come for you, Maddie, it's adults
Yeah.
doing that. And they are awful. And their attempt is to harm you. But then we're like, oh no, but young people, they want to find support. And that's what the platform will do for them. Those same bad characters exist to go after those young people that adults experience. So they're not a
Mhm.
unicorn generation. They're not like a unicorn age group that only support each other. So it's a narrow view, I think. Also, the data shows that if a young person goes on a social media platform and they're already depressed or anxious, that it will exacerbate those experiences. So it's not necessarily going to cause or create them. We can't do that with the data, because there are lots of other things that could have created that depression or that anxiety in them. So it's one
Yeah.
data point, if that makes sense, of many. However, what we do know is that when they exist with that on the platforms, that it gets worse. So you've got a young person who's maybe highly anxious because they're already vulnerable, and they go online to find belonging and community. They might find a bit of that, but their anxiety is also more likely to get worse.
Mm.
Yeah.
Jo, these big tech companies seem like they've basically been able to do whatever they want with very few regulations in place at all. It sort of feels like the Wild West. Do you see any improvement in their offering in terms of what they're doing to help prevent child grooming and exploitation?
They would say so, and the data just doesn't reflect that. So potentially the measures they've put in place aren't adequate, or bad actors, predatory people, uncontainable. So it's one or the other, a bit of both. Predators have really thrived online, and so maybe we just can't keep pace with them in the way that they have sought out children. So, in a recent conversation, for example, with Snap, which is Snapchat, they said, we're desperate to manage grooming and exploitation. And of course they are. Like, I don't think these people are out to harm children. However,
Don't think they are evil
yeah,
individuals.
think that.
Yeah.
And that's my view of most people, that they're not intending to harm. However, I don't think that they're keeping pace with the types of predatory behavior that we're seeing. So an example of that is that in New Zealand, reports of grooming on Snapchat went up 550% between 2022 and 2023. And that's from the New Zealand
Wow.
police. That's a really credible piece of information.
Oh my God.
So what they're trying to do might be really well intentioned, and it might even be good, but it's not doing what it needs to.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
You've said that social media is now what you call the digital storefront for the sex industry. Can you
Yes.
talk more about that and what you've seen through your work and research?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got more and more performers, whether they're from mainstream porn platforms or whether they're from OnlyFans or a variety of other apps, that use social media as an advertising platform. So putting pieces of content that they know will pass the filters and littering them all throughout, even contacting people directly to advertise their content and try and pull them off the platform. I'm sure that the platforms largely don't like that, because why would they want someone to leave? Like, why would Instagram want someone to leave Instagram? They don't. They want to keep them on there. However, it's been hacked, and the performers, sex industry, they know that this is really, really effective. Contact people directly in their messages, and also go after them with ads and litter their content all throughout the platform. So that's on YouTube, that's on Instagram, that's on TikTok, that's on all these places. A classic example of it, people might be like, what do you mean? What does that look like? An example of that is that there's a group of women at the moment, and they all advertise and support each other's profiles. I believe they're on OnlyFans. And so they create this heavily sexualized content. They sit, for example, chatting to each other with their legs apart and their underwear really tight so you can see their labia. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've created a mental
It's-
image. Thank
yeah,
you. Yeah.
I really am getting the scene.
So they, again, you're not going to moderate your way out of that, because there's not nudity. However, it's heavily sexual.
Heavily implied.
Yeah. And they do that to draw people in, and they perform not actual sex acts, but they emulate it with different kinds of objects or different, hand gestures. And as a result, they can advertise and pull people off the platform onto their own. That's another piece that I think people don't know about, is that advertising.
Well, there seems to be this bizarre trend of
I
people
know
being
exactly what you're
sexual
about
with
to say.
food.
Oh no, that's not. Oh yes. Well, yes,
You're
but that was
thinking of
not the
different.
example that sprung to mind.
And they're like, putting petrol in the car and sort of like humping it. And then it's honestly, I'm like, what is.
But the thing is, like,
What is
we can
going
look at that and
on?
be like, and be discerning. What we
Yes.
have as adults is discernment, and we can go, oh God, this is
Why is that
ridiculous."
person humping the side of his car while putting petrol in?
But what about the guy? And I don't know if you guys have seen this or if this is just my cooked algorithm. The guy who breeds quails. Quail
I haven't-
chicks. Have you
I
seen this
haven't
guy?
seen it.
And so
No.
he's really into his quails, legitimately breeds the quails, and he calls them to him. But every time he's interacting with the quails, what he's doing is he's also, oh God, this is just so terrible. He's
Where is this going?
he seems to not be wearing underwear, put it this way. So you can see when he's moving around quite a clear outline of what he's got in his pants.
Oh.
And the camera is, I'll flick your reel, Joe. The camera is positioned just so so that you're at the right eye level for this situation. So while it's kind of masked as like, hey, my interest is in breeding birds, and here are my cute baby quail chicks. He's also like, I've obviously read the comments, which sometimes you've just got to be there for the comments. He's also is an OnlyFans contributor, and so this is how the advertising is happening, seemingly quite innocent, and then you're like, wait a second,
Yeah.
like, what's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is sociologically, so pulling out kind of big picture, there's this concept called the power of the single story. And what you get on social media platforms is a lot of people telling the same story. So your body image one is a classic example of that. Whilst there are some other content creators which are really promoting body diversity, the majority would be a single story telling young girls to look a certain way and act a certain way. What largely young girls are still being fed, the single story, is that their sexuality is their power and their body should be there for the enjoyment, the consumption, the pleasure of others. And if it isn't, then they are not fully feminine or fully woman, or that they are not valuable in society, even that they are ugly,
Mm.
unattractive, and that's the more specific. But we still have this single story narrative. Now, that existed when we were young as well. I'm not saying that this is a new concept. However, the saturation that they see and consume is much higher. So we were probably looking at that single story on in Cosmo and Clio on music videos, but we didn't actually do that for 3 hours a day. So we did that every few days for a period of time. And
Yeah.
the rest of our time was largely talking with our friends and hanging out with family and doing sports. So the saturation, we are marinated in the content in the way that we didn't used to be. So people will say this to me as well, like, oh, well, that's issue's always been around. I'm like, yes, to a different degree. So
Yeah.
the influence has always been around, but they're not swimming in the water hours a day.
Totally.
Mm.
And in terms of existing laws that can help protect our kids, I heard that New Zealand has fewer legally binding boundaries for big tech companies than other countries. So, can you tell us what you know about that?
Absolutely. So there are in every comparable country, so that's Australia, the UK, America, other EU countries, Canada, for example, they have multiple pieces of legislation that support young people, children online in terms of if harm comes to them, they can go after the platforms. If something is uploaded online, they can go after the platforms of a child or a young person non-consensually. We don't have that. So an example would be that I have been advocating about the removal of real rape content online. So actual videos and images of people being sexually assaulted, sometimes by entire groups of people. And
Oh my God.
I would like to think that we could have that content removed, and we currently can't. Like, there is nowhere for me to even send the URL with that video and for that content to be removed because nobody has the mandate to pull it down. So we have one area where we have the mandate, which is around child sexual abuse material. But if a video of you, Maddie, for example, was, maybe it was a deep fake, it wasn't even your body, it was your face on someone else's body, then it was distributed in
Mm.
lots of places online. There's very little New Zealand will do to protect you. And if that happened.
That's
And
shocking.
we don't even, for example, have clarity on what we have, the Harmful Digital Communications Act. We don't even have clarity on whether an image of you nude, for example, has to be real or it can be artificially created. So if it was artificially created, like a deep fake, the courts would really struggle to convict because there isn't enough clarity in the legislation that the fact that it's AI is still harmful. It also requires intent to harm. And if you're 15 and you distribute a photo of another 15-year-old, which is the distribution of child sexual content, intent to harm really needs to be there. And I would argue that even if you did it as a joke, it's extremely harmful and needs to be taken extremely seriously. Now, there is so much nuance here, so I'm kind of talking about it in quite a simplified way. Uh,
Mhm.
h- However, I guess what I hope people take from that is that we need to do a lot more. And we are about 15 years behind. We also don't have a government mandated body to do widespread education. So NetSafe would be the body that could do that. However, they have some necessary ties to the platforms because they have to have, in some ways, a bit of a friendly relationship with them. But also, they very likely don't have the funds to really
Mm.
support young people in the way that they need to. So you aren't seeing TV ads about keeping kids safe. Like, nobody has ever contacted. There's been no leaflet drop. There's no
Mm.
widespread parent education. There's been no ads on my social media algorithm as a parent of an 11-year-old around what I should be doing for their online gaming. That's what we need. So we need an agency to really go hard to combat the incredibly horrific rates of harm that we currently have.
Mm. And saying that we're 15 years behind where we want to be, and comparing that to how fast tech is moving is like, that's quite a daunting prospect. So I understand Australia is ahead of us in terms of changing legislation and age verification coming into effect at the end of the year. Are we looking to them for guidance? Are they also ahead of us in terms of what you've just been talking about?
Yes, they have an e-safety commissioner, which is that body that I'm talking about, that regulatory body. And they have very clear codes which say to platforms, this is the minimum requirement in terms of safety. They have this concept, for example, called safety by design, which is where if you're creating a platform right from the beginning, it has to have children in mind. How are you going to keep kids safe if they're going to be allowed on this platform? So they are just so far in advance, further in advance than us. They are doing an age verification trial at the moment, and at the end of the year, they'll have their recommendations and be implementing those. That's going to be extremely helpful for us. Absolutely. We don't need to do our own trial. As well. Other countries have also done trials. Yoti is the most popular used age verification tool. If anybody wants to do a real deep dive, they can do
Mhm.
that. But yeah, we're not necessarily looking to them for guidance. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but we don't need to do the same level of work. So
Right. We don't need to recreate the wheel.
yeah, like we could do something different, but
Mhm.
we can use their data to support what we
Mm.
do.
I want to talk a little bit about gaming too, because look, I don't know a lot about gaming. My children are still quite small, but from what I've seen online, there are some there's some shocking things from things like Roblox online, and I think parents often don't know the dangers as their kids are just so much more tech savvy than they are. So what's your opinion of these sorts of games like Roblox and Minecraft?
What I wish that parents would do, or just as a society, the way that we would start to see platforms is see them all as adult platforms because
Okay.
they have adults on them and they're user generated sites, which means the users, adults, can create content, upload content, and engage with children on those platforms. So I think that the gaming industry, has been very intentional in going after children as a customer, because if you're going to call something Roblox, like it's like a child name.
Mm.
And the advertising is not particularly adult. You know,
Well, there's also like they've got school bags as merch. So obviously they do want children to play
they
it.
want children on there. Yeah, absolutely. So you can put parental controls in if you like. This is not my field. Gaming is, I understand how grooming and exploitation happens on gaming, but the kind of protective measures are definitely not my space. However, you can do that. I know you can. I have no trust in many platforms. Like, for example, I sat in a conference once and YouTube was a speaker, and they got up and said, we can't manage the amount of content on our platform. They were like, we just can't deal with it. We're trying, but we can't manage it. And it would be similar on a platform like
Reassuring.
I know. And it would be similar on a platform like Roblox in that it's user-generated content. People are uploading stuff. They're creating games all the time. And potentially it's whatever functions they put in place are just slightly out of reach. They can't keep pace with the harm. So my kids aren't allowed on Roblox because it's like an adult platform. They are allowed on Minecraft in a closed server once a week. So where they can play with their friends who are literally in the same room. So they're not even playing across houses, but in the same room, I'm present, there's
Yeah.
another adult present. I'm not trying to destroy children's lives. I'm not trying to like throw out the modem and get them to live in the bush. Like that's not my orientation.
Because you're also a parent to 3 boys too, right? So that's why I think people respect your opinion so much because you're so knowledgeable, but you're also a parent, and so you are in situ dealing with this as well.
Definitely in situ. Yeah, having conversations with when are they going to get a phone and when might they be able to go on social media. I also have to have conversations around their imagery and consent to be online and like so many different things. Yeah, so we have 2 levers down as parents right from the beginning. We have the control lever and we have the influence lever. Just like if you're sitting in a car, if you imagine you've got your accelerator and your brake on at the same time. So control, brake, accelerator, influence. Now, every single year, you slowly release your control lever. It comes off little by little every single year. And Hannah, you were saying like, you've nearly lost control completely. Like, and I'm the same with my soon to be 12-year-old. Like, he walks to school with a ton of people who have phones, most of which won't be filtered. I got no control over that. He could be also just straight up lying to me all the time. And so I got little control over that. What I do have is influence. I've got influence all the time, and my influence is actually only increasing with age. So we're having more conversations more frequently. So when it comes to the gaming piece, for example, I can have my control lever still quite firmly down. It's not right down because he's allowed to do more things than he was last year. And that's important to hold the relationship between us and that he knows that I'm for him and not against him. However, as any incremental release of control, I have to go further down on influence. So there's more and more chats.
That's a great way to look at it, actually. And it's just, it brings up in my mind chats that I want to have, and quite keen on the car chats because that's sometimes the only time I get them one-on-one,
Yeah.
and that's also when they will share with me too. So, because it's kind of a quiet time, there's nowhere else we can be, there's nothing else we can do. So and it also means that, like, especially for my son, because I can bang on, believe it or not, it's a limited amount of time he needs to endure some of the chats. He's like, I'm going to have to deal with this for the next 10 minutes and then we'll get you home and we'll move on to the next thing. So it's quite a safe space for everybody. I know that we've got to wrap up soon, so we've just got a couple more questions. But there's a big groundswell of parents who, are denying smartphones altogether until their children are older. And it can be really difficult if their child's in the minority of their friend group and, everyone has a phone and they don't. So what would you say to those parents who are dealing with that pressure at the moment?
This is very, very practical. But if they have any resource, use that. And I mean financial resource. Like I had, for example, a friend of mine who she didn't give her child a phone or social media for many years past her friends, but she paid for her to have her eyelashes done every few weeks. So
I love that.
This is a creative
This is a
solution.
good boots on the ground
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah. So like I would totally be using that. I would be doing anything. Any bribery is good because what you want is you want them to have some wins. You're
Yeah.
doing something hard. So let's see if you've got some resource, give them some wins. A group of kids I know, teenagers, one of the dads said to them, the last one here to get a phone gets $1,000.
Hello.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, that's not entirely plausible if there's no resource, but if you've got it, use it. I mean, what a better use of your money.
Yeah.
Totally.
There are smarter kids. There are more capable kids' phones. And there's the Samsung kids phone. I am not sponsored to say that. I am not paid by Samsung or SafeSurfer to say that. But there are phones that I would recommend. And I've said that to my oldest son. I'm like, when you get a phone, you can get the Samsung smartphone because he's like, it'll be so embarrassing to have a brick phone.
Oh, but just on that, how good was that Radio New Zealand article about that group of
Great.
teenagers with their brick phones? And they were cool guys,
They were cool.
you know.
Liked it.
That's
And
cool.
A lot.
and I feel like we need to see more, you
Yeah.
know, kids rocking their brick phones. Like, not that it's an actual
Let's go
brick.
back to the Nokia and play
yeah.
Snake, you know?
Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
like a tiny little pebble compared to the 80s bricks. But, it's just cool to normalize that conversation a bit, and they were funny and having fun. It was like, oh, that's great. We need more
Yes.
of that.
And
That's cool.
those are social norms, right? So
Mm.
we have to shift social norms. And parents ask me, like, how can I don't want to be the last one holding out. But the reality is we need a lot of last ones holding out. In order to
Yeah.
shift culture, you got to have a lot of people holding out. So if that's you, I applaud you. Please keep it going and maybe throw them some wins.
Yeah. So, what is your hope for the future of changing legislation, bringing in more laws that are protecting our young people, and for even the before 16 movement?
My hopes are exactly that. My hopes are that we establish legislation that's completely oriented around a vulnerable population, our children and young people, that social media would fall under that wider umbrella. So it would be part of it, just like deepfakes would be, just like advertising to children, how we use algorithms for children, how we, for example, get and give consent for children to be in media. So there's a lot of things that would fall under that umbrella for me. I'm really hoping that we can get there. On a wider societal level, what I'd love to see more kids having is the 3 R's. So risk, recreation, which is play, and rest. So I'd love for us to cultivate in schools and homes those 3 R's. I would love to see kids do more dangerous things and do that because it builds their sense of independence and their sense of achievement.
Confidence.
Confidence is so helpful for them. Recreation, play is how we know that's their therapy. So play is how they process what's happening in their life. We see that when kids experience trauma, they play it out because they're trying to figure out what went on, but also they're trying to figure out conflict, family dynamics, all the stuff. And rest, where they actually get space that's not expectations. Our kids do more extracurricular activities, for example, than ever before. Now, I'm largely for that. I'm not against it. My kids are like busy, so busy. However, they're doing a lot of recreation through that. That's play. And and some of which is risky, it's hard on their bodies. But we do also need to rest. So my kids often will have 30 minutes rest time in their rooms by themselves every single day. And that's sometimes you just got to sit. And that's where they often read or they draw or they write letters and they do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. So societally, that's what I'd love to see. So that legislation piece, but then also shifts in culture.
Amazing. Oh, Jo, you are just so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. And I know I speak for a lot of parents in just saying that it's empowering, like having these conversations where you can feel informed about actually these are the issues, this is the reality, and here's what we can do about it. It just gives hope, and it just doesn't feel like this insurmountable hill.
That's good.
So yeah.
Like that.
So thank you very much for your time. You're amazing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. And we've talked about some different resources and things, and we'll put all the links that we've talked about in the show notes so that people can just have a read themselves, so they can check out Tricky Chats Parentings, they can check out Before 16 and the petition there. And also that RNZ interview about the brick phones. I'd love to put that in there as well. So
Yeah.
flick me that link.
I'm like the biggest fan of that interview. I was like, yes, finally.
It's
Make
so
the brick
great.
phones cool again.
Yeah, and thank you, Jo, just for the value that you've brought to this conversation. And I just think it's such a good conversation to keep active and just keep in our minds that, we just need to be chatting to our kids all the time. And it's not just about, hey, this is a decision that we've made and we're enforcing this upon you, or the country's enforcing this upon you. It's like, well, why? What's behind this? Because, we want you to learn to create genuine connections with people in your world and have healthy relationships and healthy relationships with yourself and interests outside of, the virtual world and all of that. And hopefully, influence them to see the value in that too. So yes, Jo, thank you so much. And no doubt we will have you back soon.
Love to.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Mā te wā.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we'd love your support to keep making the show. The best thing you can do to help is subscribe by hitting follow in your podcast app and leaving us a little 5-star review. You can also now watch and subscribe on YouTube and check out how these millennials are keeping up with the cool kids on TikTok and the gram. Lastly, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can keep building this supportive community, keep giving you untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
Don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order. Lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people who make this podcast possible. Flicker Williams and Jo Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, Maxine London Creative for editing this episode, and Lana Byrne for creating our social content. And to you, our listeners, Araha nui, take care. We'll see you soon.